Welcome back, everybody. So by 2030, just 5 years from now, researchers project that nearly 1 million people in Canada will be living with dementia.
But despite this surprising number, there's a lack of accurate diagnosis and clear treatment direction for people living with dementia. And here to tell us more is Dr. Saskia Sivananthan, and a leading neuroscientist specializing in dementia, and Tamara Moona, who is a caregiver for her mom who lives with dementia. Ladies, thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
Welcome both. We're very excited. So, Saskia, for those who don't know, can you sort of walk us through what is dementia and, more importantly, what causes it?
So think of dementia as an umbrella term, just like we would say cancer.
Okay.
There are actually 100 different diseases under dementia, under that umbrella.
Didn't even know that.
I didn't know that either.
And the question I get asked a lot is, what's the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? They're the same. Alzheimer's disease is just the most common form of dementia.
So dementia's here, and Alzheimer's just one of those 100 branches.
Exactly. And so there are others. So for example, there's vascular dementia, which can happen after a stroke. There's frontal temporal dementia, which tends to happen more in your 50s, so people who are a bit younger.
Okay.
Parkinson's-related dementia, there are many. But what ties all of these different types of diseases together is memory loss and progressive memory loss that continues until eventually the person is unable to take care of themselves on a day-to-day basis.
So presumably, if there's 100 different types of dementia, are there 100 different reasons why it happens? Or?
Yes, so it's such a complex disease. I mean, not unlike other major diseases. We know, for example, with Alzheimer's disease, that there are things called amyloid plaques and tangles that are in the brain, but it's different depending on the type of disease. There's things like inflammation that be contributing to it. And because it's so complex, it's been so difficult to find good treatments and cures for it.
Okay.
All right, so Tamara, as I mentioned in the intro, your mom is living with dementia. So would you mind telling us about her story and how she was diagnosed?
Yeah, for sure. My mom is amazing. She's highly educated. She worked as a nurse for 30 years here in Toronto.
Wow.
And she retired as a head nurse at the start of the pandemic. 2 years later, we started to notice cognitive decline. It started with memory issue, short-term memory issue, and maybe states of confusion and disorientation, as well as, her being a bit more unable to do daily tasks. So immediately we reported this to her family doctor, and unfortunately it took us about 2 years to be able to get a diagnosis.
Wow, my goodness.
Yeah, so for us, we didn't see this coming, right? So for us, our family was completely devastated.
Was your mom aware of it as well?
She didn't really recognize it herself. And I think the reason why I recognize it is because I live in another country and I only saw her, so I was able to pick up immediately.
Difference in her
Absolutely.
Saw her.
Absolutely.
So Saskia, can you tell us a bit more about how dementia manifests? What does it typically look like?
Right, so depending on the type of dementia, the symptoms are going to be a bit different. But to Tamara's point, you'll see those sort of short-term forgetfulness, those memory losses, and they're much beyond your regular forgetfulness, right? So it'll be things like the person might be forgetting to eat their meals. They might have forgotten a recent event or conversation and are repeating themselves. And that's not over days, that's over a short period of time. And then as dementia progresses, it starts impacting longer-term memories. So things like major life events, remembering loved ones' names and relationships, and it sort of eventually starts affecting the person's ability to function day to day. But the thing about dementia, because we talked about that umbrella term, some dementias have other symptoms that manifest first. So it might be things like personality changes, disorientation, which Tamara noticed as well, mood swings. So it can be a little different before the memory loss.
And Tamara, it took 2 years for you guys to even find out what was really happening with your mother. So talk to us about the challenges you and your family have been facing since getting that diagnosis.
I think the biggest challenge is the lack of urgency. It feels like I have to really chase, I have to follow up and advocate for my mother. When I really think that healthcare should be accessible, I should be able to trust my health providers to be able to do things in a timely manner. But I felt like I had to really be on top of it to make sure that appointments were scheduled as soon as possible. I think the second thing is, because I'm not in country, all of these conversations are happening after hours for me, right?
Yeah.
And I attend all of her doctor meetings and things like that. So I want to be there. I think the other thing for me is that a lot of the health plan was medication. And through my own independent research, I realized that there's so much more that we can do to help people go through, or at least slow down the progression of the disease. So I started to do things and looking at it more holistically, thinking about nutrition, supplementation, thinking about things that we already, fitness, making sure that we have the right social communities and interactions, and as well making sure that I'm doing things to help train her brain, stimulate her brain as well. So I think those things are what I'm trying to do now, but it's not easily accessible to find how to do that.
Saskia, can you help us understand that, or why, despite dementia affecting so many people, it's still so hard to get a timely diagnosis?
Yeah. I mean, just even looking at those numbers that we talked about at the beginning, there was a recent poll that showed more than 3 out of 4 Canadians know someone living with dementia, who lived with dementia, and over 40% are providing caregiving responsibilities. Wow. So this is not small numbers in terms of how it's impacting us. But I say there are like 4 strikes against dementia. The first is the stigma of the disease. It is a hard disease to get your head around. The second is ageism. We tend to think of dementia as an older person's disease. We don't value that stage the same way. But the third is also there haven't been a lot of treatment breakthroughs. So there hasn't been a feeling of hopefulness until more recently. But I'd say the biggest issue is our fractured healthcare system. To Tamara's point, there's no pathway through the health system. So the average wait time for a diagnosis of dementia is 21 to 28 months. So 2 years, which is exactly what Tamara's mom went through. And then after that diagnosis, sometimes it's 9 months before you get a follow-up. So imagine
is there a reason, a concrete reason why that's happening, why it's taking so long?
There's a whole range of things. There's training for healthcare providers. There's no real coordinated support and holistic approach to how we think about dementia, rehab supports. And then, like I said, the treatment options are almost 20 years old, right? And so they're only just starting to come out with better diagnostics and treatments. So we haven't thought about the disease as something that we can do something about. Instead, we kind of say to people, well, go home and just prepare. And that's just not the way to approach it.
Yeah, no one wants to hear that. Well, I know your focus is your mom, Tamara, because you love her very much. And I know a lot of people are going through this. Talk to me about the emotional toll this is having on you and your family, because this must be really hard. And a lot of times people don't think about the caregivers.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. The emotional toll is incredibly high. I obviously love my mom so much, but being a caregiver, it's almost like you're losing the person that you love the most, but they're right here. And it's very difficult to watch. And I think as a caregiver, you have to be patient, you have to be kind, and you have to be consistent. But I'm also a human being, and I make a lot of mistakes. And so when that happens, I feel riddled with guilt. And it can feel really alienating. You feel super alone, right? I think the other scenario in my case is that my mom isn't really aware that she has this illness, right? And so there are times where I need her to be actively participant in something, and I need to convince her to do something, and she refuses. And it's those moments where I may have to remind her that she has this illness, and I have to stop and think, is this something I want to do? Do I want to have her revisit that moment of diagnosis, right, and relive that? So I don't even know what the right answer is. It depends on the situation, but it's this terrible feeling to have to go through this forever, right? So it's quite challenging. And the reality is we have our own lives as well, right? I have a career. Some people may have children that they're taking care of. So as a caregiver, it feels unsustainable, and there's just not enough help to support caregivers that are helping their parents or families or friends.
Thank you for answering that question so beautifully and honestly. That was incredible. Thank you. Saskia, what should we do if we notice cognitive decline in ourselves or in someone we love?
So I have 5 recommendations, and these come from people living with dementia and their care partners. So the first is to go in to see your family doctor to try and get a diagnosis, because that is important, but handle that sensitively, because we know how difficult it can be. But once you get that diagnosis, there are a couple of key things you need to do. The first, reach out to your health authority, your local health authority, because you get access to home care, community supports, right? You can start building that support support system for yourself. And often people wait a long time before they do that. Also reach out to your local Alzheimer's Society, Parkinson's Society, Heart and Stroke. All of these organizations provide free education and supports to help you figure out what's coming next, how to navigate. The third is get a power of attorney in place.
Oh, wow.
This is so key,
Yes.
because this is going to be the person who's going to be your proxy decision maker for when you can't make decisions anymore, or they'll advocate and support you as you're going along the journey. So it's got to be someone you trust. And you also want to write down your goals of care and your goals of life. Just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean that you can't live your life to the fullest and still plan out what that looks like.
That's right.
So that's really important. The fourth is most people don't realize that dementia is considered a disability in Canada. So you can apply for disability supports, there's caregiver tax credits, and other options as well. But the fifth is probably the most important, is focus on your brain health. So we talk a lot, right, about brain health for risk reduction of dementia, but there's more and more evidence really talking about how taking that holistic approach early, when you first get that diagnosis, can also help slow cognitive decline.
Okay.
This is what Tamara is really talking about. Exercising, focusing on your diet, social engagement, these are so important.
Wow. Dr. Sivananthan, thank you so much for your knowledge. Tamara, thank you for sharing your story about your mom. Such an important conversation. Thank you both so much. We really appreciate it. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, you, come a bit closer. We've got so many more must-see interviews, spicy debates, lifestyle tips, and pop culture moments. So subscribe to our channel by tapping the logo below and don't miss out.